Okay, good evening and welcome to our Broadview National Online Reading Club. My name is Jocelyn Bell and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadview. Working behind the scenes to help me out tonight is Sharon Doran, Broadview's promotion manager, and we're so glad that you are here with us this evening. We'd love to know who you are and where you're from, so please, if you'd like to, you can type that into the chat space and let us know where you're from. And if you want to include your faith community as well, then that would be interesting to hear too. So this evening we decided to change up our format a bit. As I was mentioning before we got started, in the past, we've always had the writers for Broadview, the contributors for Broadview featured at these reading club meetings. But today we decided that it would be a lot of fun to include 3 people who were featured as the subjects of stories. So in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to 3 brave and fascinating women, Junia Joplin, Roksana Hajrizi, and Kayla Gray. Just a few more housekeeping notes before we begin. After our speakers have told us a bit about themselves, we're going to have question time. Now, we know from our surveys that people really want to hear your questions and have a good dialogue and not just hear from me, although I've got lots of questions prepared if needed. But please be brave and ask questions or make comments. Our writers or our subjects would love to engage with you, and I'd love to hear from you too. So if you have a question, what you can do is you can type it into the chat space. That's one option. Or if you want to, you can just say, I have a question. And then I will throw the floor to you, and then you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. So that's about it for the instructions, and I think we can get started. So our first speaker is Junia Joplin. Junia is a Baptist minister in Mississauga, Ontario, who was fired from her ministry at Lauren Parks Baptist Church after coming out to the congregation as transgender. The story of her dismissal was covered by dozens of Canadian outlets and also by the New York Times. In Broadview's November issue, June was featured in a story by Glynis Ratcliffe called Evangelical Rift. That was about evangelical Christians fighting for more acceptance for LGBTQ2 Christians within their churches. So please join me in welcoming June.
Well, thanks, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for Broadview's commitment to diversity and inclusion. And it was wonderful to talk to Glynis for the story. I haven't, the Broadview article is one of the few things that I've actually picked up a hard copy of. And so I leave it kind of conspicuously on the coffee table at my house every now and then. So thanks for all the work that you all have done. My name is Junia Joplin. I grew up in a fundamentalist Baptist church in Western North Carolina. And from probably around the age of 6 or 7, I realized that I kind of felt different and didn't have the understanding or language in those days to really know what I knew. I always like to describe the difference between knowing something and knowing what it was you knew. By the time I was probably 11 years old, I understood 2 things pretty clearly: that I was supposed to be a minister, I was supposed to be a pastor, and that I was supposed to be a girl. And those are the 2 things I really would have wanted most out of life. Interestingly enough, I kind of, those 2 senses of my identity became clear in the context of a single week at a Christian summer camp in upstate New York. And I spent the week sleeping in a cabin on an island, and there was a boys' side of the island and there was a girls' side of the island. And by the end of that week, I realized, I am on the wrong side of the island. But when I got home from camp, I realized that these 2 life-changing realizations, these 2 parts of my identity that I saw as indescribable callings almost, were very different from one another. There was one of those callings that I could share with the people in my life. I could go to my pastor and my youth pastor and my parents and other folks in my church and say, I've been called into ministry. I think I'm supposed to be a preacher, and know that because I was being read and seen as a little boy, that I could get lots of affirmation and encouragement. So I was given lots of opportunities to, I guess, develop my vocation. But at the same time, I was in an environment where I really I found it absolutely necessary to repress my sense of gender. And, into the 80s and the 90s and even into the early 2000s, it was so difficult for transgender people to even become self-accepting. Occasionally, I'll come across an article or some bit of pop culture from that era, and maybe some of you could call a few to mind. And the depictions of transgender people were generally not very gracious. I usually describe the depictions of trans people through, up until very recently, and even sometimes today, as falling into one of three categories that start with P: punchlines, pretenders, and perverts. That's usually how they were portrayed. And so I knew, like, to ever tell anybody would be to essentially throw my life away, to jeopardize my career, my relationship with the people that I loved. It would just be, it would just destroy everything. And in fact, I was reading an old, a chapter from a book about being transgender. And it basically said that, like, if you're going to come out, be prepared to throw your entire life away, because that's what it's going to do to you. So this was kind of the general counsel for a number of years. A lot of us are, I guess a lot of LGBTQ plus people in general through youth, especially those of us that are a little older, are conditioned to believe that maybe we'll grow out of it someday, that, this is just a phase. As I get older, this is going to go away. And, as my life kind of stabilized, as I landed in what was a really wonderful position at a great church, and kind of reached that, like, mid 30s, like as high up the like vocational ladder as I could get, I realized as the dust settled on that chapter of my life, like, oh, this sense of incongruence, the sense of homesickness is still there. Fortunately, along the way, I got to move here to Canada, where, by now, transgender rights have been enshrined in the Constitution, and a number of organizations are trying to make space for and make safe space for LGBTQ plus people and trans people in particular. I was the volunteer team manager of one of my kids' hockey teams a couple of years ago, which feels like a very Canadian thing compared to being a kid in North Carolina. And in order to volunteer with the kids on the team, I had to take a module, like a webinar that a gal Canada put out on understanding discrimination based on gender and gender identity, sexual orientation. And while I was taking that, I realized, you know what, June, like, some of this stuff about gender dysphoria and about being transgender applies to you, and you need to pay attention to that. I went to the Glad Day bookstore in Toronto and talked to just a sales clerk, and said I have questions about my gender identity. What should I be reading? I got referred to the 519 LGBTQ plus community center in Toronto. I got into counseling, and over time, as I became more and more self-accepting, I realized that transition was in my future, but I was afraid of what that would do to my career. There aren't very many transgender women pastors out there. There are almost none that have come out and kept jobs on the other side of transition. I realized that the stories I had heard about trans women ministers usually involved either them being outed and being pushed aside with no chance to kind of speak their piece, or it involved them talking to leaders in their church only to be quietly, again, pushed aside, pushed to the margins. And I thought about resigning, and I know folks who've done that so they could focus on transition. Ultimately, I decided that to do that would be complicit in my own marginalization. I didn't want to do that. So I realized that I had a platform that not many trans people are given, and that I could use that to help my denomination and kind of my corner of the church, which is kind of a moderate Baptist world, I could use that to kind of provoke them into having conversations that I've heard people say for 20 years. We are not ready for it yet. We're not ready for it yet. We're not ready for it yet. Wait till next year. You know, maybe we can talk about it then. Maybe we can talk about it. And I've been listening to people say this since the early 2000s. And I figured, you know, like while we are waiting, while we are kicking the can down the road, you know, trans lives are being lost. There are studies that demonstrate that the more important religion is in the lives of queer youth, the more likely they will have been to experience suicidal ideation. So I wanted to do something about that. And I wanted to, I guess, deliver a word of hope and encouragement to all the LGBTQ plus kids, especially trans people that are in churches out there, some of whom are not even self-accepting or not out of the closet yet. And so I did that. Because of COVID, I did that via Zoom because that's the way church happens now. And I realized that had the potential to give me a little bit bigger an audience, and that ended up happening. I think something like 50 or 60,000 people have watched the coming out sermon that I preached on June the 14th. And my congregation went into a season of discernment. They showed some signs of promise. They called me by the right name and pronouns, and I think made an effort to at least hear me. But then after 5 weeks of a congregational vote was held, and I very narrowly lost that vote by, I think it was 8 votes, 5 votes, 53 to 58. So I lost my job, and that's when the story kind of got attention. So I've been doing a lot of guest preaching, a lot in United churches here in Canada. I'm going to be at Trinity St. Paul's in the Annex in Toronto virtually this Sunday. Been doing a lot of that, and I don't really know what comes next for me. And sometimes I'm afraid of getting back into church work, but sometimes I don't know. I'm in this era when I think a lot of folks in the world are just waiting on the next thing to happen, and I'm doing that in more ways than one. But I wanted to use, yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna jump in, and one question that might be on many people's minds is whether you've thought about transferring your ministry to the United Church of Canada, where there are trans people who have come before you and paved the way, and it's officially accepting of LGBTQ. Is that crossed your mind?
Yeah, it has actually. One of the things that I'm finding really difficult in this season is I'm doing a lot of soul searching as to whether or not I have like the emotional energy to put myself out there for another church or another denomination to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's maybe the scariest thing in my world right now. And so the idea of like filling out a giant stack of paperwork and saying, please accept me, United Church, and then having to wait. I know they probably would, but it's just about the scariest thing I can think of right now. So I started the transfer process, I don't know, 9-10 months ago, and I just cannot summon the strength to finish the application. So
that's very
not anytime soon, I don't think.
Yeah, you've been through a lot. I'm just going to remind people, if you have a question, put it in the chat, or just say I have a question in the chat, and we'll throw it to you. I also was very curious to know, I mean, New York Times, that's a pretty big that's a pretty big deal, but also a lot of national media coverage for what happened to you. Did that feel supportive? Did you feel sort of vindicated about that, or how did you process all the attention that you received over being fired for who you are?
I felt like the attention was overwhelmingly positive. I'm connected with a lot of trans people, trans women especially, in social media, and some of them have dealt with media in the past because, for better or worse, coming out is still kind of a news item. One day I don't think it will be, but I know other trans women that have made the news simply for coming out, and so a couple of them said, you really got to watch out for the media. They're not your friends. And I think they had bad experiences. And I think that, and I've seen stories covering other people coming out maybe 10 years ago or more, and the coverage is not as, I think, sensitive or responsible. There's a lot of like before photos and dead naming and that kind of stuff. And um, I feel like the coverage has all been pretty positive. It's been pretty sympathetic. I've tried to be as gracious and vulnerable and, demonstrate humanity as much as I could. That's been part of the goal, is just to put a human face on something that too many Christians, or at least too many Christians in my corner of the church, just think of as this like hypothetical issue and don't realize that there are human lives at stake.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question from Michael. Go ahead, Michael.
Great, thanks. Hi, June, and thanks very much. It was a lovely sermon, by the way, as well. It's very beautiful. Given the really sort of heartbreaking response from some of the congregation, it kind of brings up a question that's often just very close to mind with this kind of thing, which is, and I think it's a big question that we don't really have an easy answer to, but I'm sure you've thought about just why people have so much trouble with who other people are when it is something that seems really to not affect their lives, seems not to necessarily affect their faith. Just why is it such a polarizing topic in that environment at all for anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question. And I think it's a complicated, I think there's a number of reasons. I think trans women face a particularly strong type of, I guess, misogyny, one of the side effects or byproducts of patriarchy, in a system that either explicitly or implicitly privileges and prioritizes men. The idea that somebody perceived as male would want to become female or be female it feels to a lot of people like a step down. And and that's part of, I think, the source of a lot of prejudice against trans women in particular. This isn't quite as much the case these days, but I mean, it's still, there have been an awful lot of gags, at least in movies and television, where all like a man has to do is put on a dress, and it's like the clown stepping on a banana peel, and you have to ask yourself, well, what's at the root of that? Why is that comical? If half the planet could wear a dress to work, like why is it humiliating or funny? And there's a lot of just garden variety misogyny behind it. I think a lot in the church don't understand that transition is not something that people do frivolously or without a lot of thought. I think there's folks all over the world who just think of transgender people as folks who opportunistically wake up one day and say, you know what, I could be more successfd in life if I was just, if I pretended to be a woman. And that's totally not the way that it works. And I'd hoped to show some of that to my congregation, many of whom had never interacted with a transgender person before, and I think some of them understood it, but I do think there's still a lot of folks within the church who see this as more of a moral decision rather than something that's more of a related to like physical and mental health.
Okay, thank you. We've got about 1 more minute, and Mary Leslie has a question for you. Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, I'm wondering how this was for the congregation you left. What happened to them after the vote, and where have they gone, or what do you know about where they've gone since you had to leave?
We had a pastoral staff of 5 people, and I was fired and 2 others resigned in solidarity. The church council had 8 people on it and 7 of them resigned. I don't talk to a lot of the folks from the church, but I talk to a lot of folks that used to go there and don't go there anymore. That's part of, I'm kind of grateful for folks that are willing to do that. I've actually heard from people that go to other churches that have sent letters to church leadership to say, we realize that June would not be welcomed here at this church, and so we are not going here anymore. And I kind of wish everybody would do that, frankly. So to the folks that have done that for Lauren Park, really, my hat's off to them.
Well, all of our hats off to you, June. You're very brave, and I really appreciate your vulnerability and how you share your story and your openness. You certainly do show humanity of yourself, and yeah, it's a very powerful story, and we wish you the best. I think we would all welcome you into the United Church with open arms. So those of us who are part of the United Church. We're going to move along now to another very brave woman who is Roksana Hajrizi. Roksana is an activist from Ottawa, and in 1997, when she was just 3 years old, her family fled to Canada from former Yugoslavia. As Roma people, they faced persecution and yearned for a safe place to call home. In the 23 years that they've lived in Canada, Roksana's family has carried on as failed refugees, without status or documentation, a life that she has described as feeling like being permanently stuck on the sidelines. In our November issue, Roksana co-authored her own story, Torn Apart, with help from journalist Kieran Delamont. She poignantly shared her difficult journey as a Roma refugee in Canada, the pain of being separated from her dad, who was deported in 2019, and what it's like to live with the fear that her mother or her and her sister could be next. So please join me in welcoming Roksana.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to everyone who has given me this space to share my story. So in 1997, my family and I fled from Yugoslavia, a country that no longer exists, and we came to Canada seeking asylum. I was just 3 years old at the time. My parents applied for refugee protection. A decision came in the year 2000. It did not rule in our favor. The IRB representative stated that she found that we would face discrimination as Roma people, but it wouldn't amount to persecution because the state authorities were offer us protection. Now, I know many folks out there don't know about the Roma history and what happens even in modern times. Roma people have been historically persecuted, and they continue to be all across the globe, especially in Europe. There were several grounds to overturn. My mother was not given a proper translator. There were some other issues. And so there were two options that lawyer back then that he could do. The first thing that he could do was he could make an application to the RAD. That means making an application to the refugee board itself. But the lawyer did not take that path. Instead, he took it for judicial review. There were several grounds, as I said, several strong grounds to overturn that negative decision, including violating my mother's human rights. Unfortunately, the immigration lawyer did not submit documents on time, and the case was dismissed in federal court, meaning that the judge did not even look at our documents and what we had prepared. So my family and I remained as failed refugees, which meant that we didn't have no status in Canada. And that's something that took place, and for the last 2 decades, my family and I have been living in Canada with no legal status. We've tried applying, but as many of you have already read, that there has been repeated lawyer negligence on our files that have hindered our fair and equal opportunity. There were a lot of challenges that my family and I were facing, not having legal status. One example I can give you folks is that my brother Richard unfortunately died, and we were not given an option on how we could proceed moving forward. What I mean by that is we could not bury my brother, And the reason why we couldn't even bury my brother was because we didn't have any legal status. We didn't know what would be happening with us, whether we would be able to stay here in Canada or not. So the only alternative step moving forward was to cremate him. And so he's been with us for the last 22 years. And there were several other challenges that my family and I endured over the last 2 decades. But I believe the only thing that kept my family in good spirits was that we were always together. Whatever problems would happen, we would break it like bread and share it amongst ourselves and try to solve that issue, as best as we possibly could. My aunt unfortunately died of cancer in 2011, and she was my second mom. And she was overseas, and I wasn't even able to say goodbye to her. So there was lots of things, lots of issues, lots of challenges and barriers, and lots of opportunities that we've missed because we had no legal status. But we were always kept in good spirits because we were together. Last year has been the most difficult and challenging. I can't even speak, I'm so sorry. Last year was the worst I've ever experienced in my last 23 years of having no legal status. My father was deported. Shortly after that, my mother was given notice that she was in the process of being deported. Shortly after that, my sister and I were also given a notice saying that we were in the process of being deported. So that means that my family would be separated in 3 different countries, meaning my 2 Canadian-born brothers would be here in Canada. My sister and I would be with her father in Kosovo, and my mother would be all alone in Poland. I didn't know what to feel. One thing that kept circling and repeating in my mind was that if I didn't do something, I would live with regret for the rest of my life. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to start. I've never advocated. I've never been to a rally ever before in my life. So these are things that I had to learn. I went to my first rally. I had to learn how it was properly done. There was a first ever Roma rally in the city of Ottawa that was held last year. So I kind of made history. So I'm really proud of that. But I told myself, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to show the amount of love I have for my family? How was I supposed to show my pain in my heart? How could I show the world the 26-year bond I had with my mother, for instance? The love, the support. She was always there for me. She accepted my identity, something that it is very taboo in my culture. So I put my health at risk, and I decided to buy a tent, and I slept in front of the Prime Minister's office for 8 days last year in the winter. I'm not courageous at all. For me, it was do or die, because you don't have to know. I mean, you don't have to physically be somewhere to understand what's going on in the country. You know, we live in modern society where we are just clicks away. We have the internet. So I was watching all of these things happening in these countries where we could potentially be, you know, how would I be able to live? How would I be able to survive knowing that my mother at her old age is in a country where it's dangerous for her? You know, who would rub her feet when they would hurt? You know, who would bring her a cup of tea? You know, who would be there to comfort her? You know, what about my brothers who are in Canada, my young brothers? You know, how would they cope? How would they be able to continue working knowing that their family, I mean, the father and two sisters are in one country, the other parent, the mother, is in one country, you know? So I did that, and I had a lot of support. I had global support from many folks out there. I had 2 international rallies held in honor of my family. I had one done in London, UK, and the other I had in India. And I was surrounded with lots of love. Strangers that never met me, asking me how they could help me. I mean, I have family in Europe that disowned me, that wished death upon me and my family. And here it is, you know, strangers asking me, you know, what could I do to help you? So I was surrounded with love. And so I just continued doing all of these calls for actions, doing anything I possibly could do so that people could understand our situation, you know.
Roksana, I wonder if that's a good place to start. And what can we do to help you? I know we have a link that we're going to post. People can make a donation, and the pain of this situation is just absolutely palpable. You communicate it very effectively, but I'm just, you know, I'm kind of, you know, I just really feeling that right now for you. What is it that Canadians don't understand is kind of another question about, I mean, Canadian-born people who haven't experienced the immigration system directly. What is it we don't understand, and what can we do to help change this for you and for your family and for other people in your situation?
That's a great question. Thank you. What I've seen and what I've personally experienced is that there's a lot of social and negative stigma that is towards Roma people, that is towards refugees, that is towards people living in Canada with no legal status. And that's something that I've tried to show throughout this past year of my advocacy work. And I never once blamed anybody for what has happened. I simply just expressed what has happened. And it is the truth. And it is something that I could back up with documents. And I said, you know, we've lived in Canada for the last 2 decades with no legal status because there has been repeated lawyer negligence. But I've never outed those lawyers' names. I've had people tell me, you know, I think you should identify those people. And I said, absolutely not. Whether it was all done by mistake or, you know, that mistake has already been done. And I don't want to tarnish that person's name because ultimately that person works to bring food on their table. And that's something I don't want to do. You know, so I'm a human being. I can understand that it has happened. But this is something that I've tried to show the world. This is something that I've tried to show Canada, saying that, you know, there's a population of over 1 million undocumented people living here in Canada. And this is something that unfortunately happens. And my case is very unique because my family, we are a LGBT interfaith Roma family, you know, and so, you know, we were threatened with my family being separated and divided in 3 different countries. And this is something that I tried to express. And this is something that I tried to show other people by showing them awareness, trying to make them understand that, you know, for instance, I had someone tell me, you know, well, if you're undocumented, why don't you document yourself? And I said, well, it's not that simple. You know, there's laws and procedures that are in place. Unfortunately, there isn't any law or specific procedure or another alternative step that I could take, you know, being in the position that I am. And that's something that I tried to express, and that's something that I've tried to show the world, you know. And like I said, there's just negative stigma. I've had good responses, I've had bad responses, but you know, one thing that I wish for people to do more often is to show kindness, more compassion, more understanding. Like this pandemic, for example, you know, when it hit Canada, there were folks that were fortunate to have legal status who have stepped up and who has done a lot for this great country. There's also the folks living with no legal status here in Canada that also stepped up and took action. You know, for instance, my mother is a trained seamstress, and my mother, my sister, and I, we've made thousands of masks that have gone all across the Eastern Ontario hospitals here in Ottawa, masks that have gone to retirement homes, to staff, and to residents. And so what I'm trying to say is, I hope by me speaking out, I hope by my voice being heard by other folks, what I'm basically trying to say is that I hope people could be there for one another before there's a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's something that I want to express, right? So I hope that, you know, people will be there for their neighbors, for their community, you know, for their city, for their country. And, you know, what I've tried also to do is to show people the other side of what happens, you know, what we have experienced, what we have gone through. And, you know, it's been a wild journey. But my family and I were very grateful to be on Canadian soil. And I have, I know I've taken more than 5 minutes, I'm so sorry, but I would just like to give a small, well, it's not a small, but I'd like to give an update.
You have to do it in 1 minute so that we can leave enough time
Okay.
for our next guest. Thank you.
Okay, so the update is my mother's application was accepted in the second stage. She's done her medical exam, which means that she's on the path to permanent residency. My mother is very, very scared still because she does not have that permanent resident card in her hand. And I'm trying to explain to her on a daily basis that she's safe, that she does not have to worry, that she's safe on Canadian soil, that she won't be separated from her children. And, you know, that we can slowly start to restore my family and slowly start to bring back our father. So thank you to everyone who's been there for us and never left our side.
Thank you, Roksana. And there were some questions that people have typed into the chat that you might want to just take a look at once you've had a chance to have a drink and catch your breath. And people have some other interesting questions there for you if you want to answer them, either privately directly to the person or to everyone if you'd like to. If you'd like to help Roksana's cause, we've got the link there for donations posted. So please feel free to click through on that and check it out and help her out. Moving along to another brave woman that I'm very pleased to introduce to everybody. Kayla Gray is Canada's first Black woman to host a national sports show. She broke through that barrier 2 years ago when she made her on-air debut as an anchor of SportsCenter on TSN, Canada's largest sports channel. Kayla is also a weekend radio host at TSN, a correspondent on The Amazing Race Canada, and a contributor to several national news and lifestyle television programs, including E-Talk, The Social, and Your Morning. Kayla Gray graced our November cover, as everyone remembers, and her interview with Claire Siboney is featured inside, and it was shared more than 1,700 times on Instagram, which was a lot for Broadview. In the interview, Kayla spoke frankly about her experiences with racism and sexism, about being a Black woman in the media, her engagement with the Black Lives Matter movement, and about how the pandemic has helped her reconnect to her faith. So please join me in welcoming Kayla Gray.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming me, and thank you so much for the kind intro. First and foremost, Roksana, just hearing your story, it's thank you for being so honest and truthful and letting us in. And wow, you are amazing. Yeah, you know, I think about Kamala Harris and her just being named, you know, the VP elect. And she said something that was very interesting. And I think it's stuck to me because it speaks to kind of who I am. And she said, you know, when we think about firsts and barriers, some might just assume that you just step over the barrier. But usually if you're the first, you are breaking through. There is pain, there can be cuts, there's breaking that happens. And I think that really sums it up when you talk about people who break through those glass ceilings. Is there are scars and there are times where it is not easy, but yet you still have to progress. So for me, that has been what this pandemic has been about. It's been a time where I have never fallen more into my purpose than before. And I know that I am on the right path. I know I'm being guided. I know I'm being watched over with everything. You know, when it comes to media, we can sort of bring it back to, you know, 2018 when I made my debut in Canada, or made my debut as the first Black woman to host a sports highlight show in Canada. You know, that was just 2018. That was not too long ago. But that spoke to the lack of representation in general, especially in the sport media industry. There, frankly, was nobody that had looked like me, talked like me, that was on television. I mean, I joke about this a lot, but I was the girl that would stream illegal ESPN feeds from the States just to see the Robin Waters of the world, or Robin Roberts rather, of the world, women that looked like me on television. And you know, it seems so small because it is sports, but as we all witnessed with the murder of George Floyd, why it became such an important cause for me to fight for diversity is it became life and death. I figured that the more society saw people that look like me, Black people, on their television screens, hosting sports shows, on, you know, sitcoms, having great joy with family and finding love, and the same storylines that you would see typically, you know, being acted out by, say, white counterparts or white families. I figured if you saw us more, then maybe we would become more human to society, and maybe we would be less easy to disregard as people. Maybe our humanity would finally be seen, and maybe we would be stopped being killed. And so for me, I just remember watching, you know, the video of George Floyd, which a lot of us, I think, rocked us to our core, and deciding very early on, Kayla, you need to speak. You need to find your voice, and you need to use your platform. Trust in God and trust in what you have to say, but the time is now, because you might lose your job. And that was something I had to come to grips with, was that I may very well lose my job. No other time had there been a moment where we would have or undergo such a media reckoning, really, where media personalities were coming out and sharing their stories of what they faced when it came to racism in the workforce, racism in the newsroom, what stories they were sharing, how those stories were being shared. And so for me, it literally came down to, you might lose your job, but you just sat through an 8-minute and 46-second video and watched somebody lose his life. And that's kind of what brought me to that point. And you know, it was wonderful connecting with Claire and Broadview, because the interview just felt so genuine. Because of the racial reckoning, what we were finding was, you know, people were putting, you know, as much people of color on their screens, or getting as many BIPOC voices as possible. And that's the easy part, right? but genuine work is the behind the scenes stuff. How are you changing culture? How are you creating a culture so that BIPOC staff can feel safe at work? The easy stuff is to just put, say, me on the screen, but I don't have hiring power, and I don't have the power when it comes to selecting what viewers on television watch. So the real work is the behind the scenes stuff. And why it meant so much to do this interview with Broadview is, you know, that was what we were talking about, was the real substantial change that can help create a better future for, say, my son who's 2 when he can become older. And so for me, the last couple of months, this has been kind of what my path has taken me on. And although through some very unfortunate circumstances, I've never felt so sure. There have been threats. There have been, you know, angry emails, angry viewers. There have been people who would rather listen to me stick to sports. But still, I carry on because I truly believe when you are clear on why you're here, when you're clear on your purpose, not many people can shake you. And so, yeah, this year for me has been one of really finding purpose, and becoming a person of service. And sure, I was the first in my role as the first Black woman to host a sports highlight show. But my goal moving forward always will be to make sure I'm not the last. Yeah. And that's why I work so hard to make sure that I am trying to, you know, when it comes to the behind the scenes, the work that I'm doing, mentorship, reaching out, engaging with my community. And so, yeah, this year for me and my family and just sort of everything that I've been sort of doing and partnering with other broadcasters, this is the most important work I've done in my life. So I was very honored to be featured in Broadview.
We picked the best time possible to put you on the cover then. That's great. There's a question from John Ryerson, and maybe John, I could read it, but I think you might want to get on if you can, because you're referring to some headlines. I would like, you might want to explain that a little bit. John, are you there?
Sure, thank you. I guess a number of things that I'm reacting to these days, you know, when a Black ballerina becomes a prima ballerina at the American Ballet Theater, and it's a headline because she's the first Black person to do that. And I guess in my ideal world, one day that won't be the headline. Mm-hmm. So when I watched this weekend, I saw the New York Times and the LA Times did not say Black. They said she was a woman. They said she was vice president. Other media said Black woman. And The Guardian did a story about breaking the barrier, which was an absolute legitimate story. And so it's just, I guess I was really bothered by, why does it have to be start with the word Black, as if that somehow explains her capability to be a vice president?
Mm-hmm. That's a very fair question. And it's one that I've faced a lot because people will always say the first Black woman. And I think, you know, when I take pride in people saying that, it almost acknowledges the hurdles that I've gone through as a Black woman to get to that position. You know, when we're thinking about predominantly white spaces, such as TSN, because frankly, there are still a lot of, you know, white anchors. For me to make my debut and in 2018, kind of shows kind of what maybe might be happening behind the scenes and the hesitancy to put someone that looks like me on the screens because the audience might not be accepting of. And so I think, and we can hope and we can pray that one day it will not matter, you know, and we will not have to announce ourselves. But I think in this moment we have to, because it acknowledges the struggle to get to that point. And it also, you know, I also take pride in it because I want other young women that look like me to see that this is possible, that it is possible. You know, and, you know, we think about Kamala Harris and her being a Black woman. first of all the things as a woman to be in that position of power that she's going to have to face. I honestly imagine it'd probably be worse than Barack Obama. And then not to mention the racism as a Black woman that she will face. And she probably has already faced all that stuff, but yet she persisted. And so I think that's maybe why it's important to kind of honor that title there.
Kayla, I have to ask this question. When you posted this picture on your Instagram, you commented, "If only I made this face back in the day when so many told me I couldn't." I love that. I want to know what you meant by it.
Yeah, a little bit about my backstory is I always joke like I am not supposed to be here. I had moved out of my mom's place at 15 years old. I was the troubled child who got kicked out of 2 high schools before really finding her way. So it almost felt like, me saying I want to get into sports broadcasting one day and saying that out loud to other adults, they, and maybe rightfully so, would laugh in my face and say, well, that's a very cute idea. Because, the president and history shows us that, someone who almost had all those cards stacked against them should not be thinking that that's where they want to end up. And so, when I write stuff like that, it's a gentle nudge, a reminder to take pause and to just give thanks. To give thanks for the journey, and to give thanks for what the hardships have prepared me for. Like, I'm a firm believer, in struggle and the beauty of it. And the way that I always frame it is I am loved so much that I have been placed these hurdles that I think at the time that I can't get over, but the man upstairs sure knows that I'm built to take it on. And so for me, it took a while actually for me to be open and honest about my truth when I was younger. Because I was in the working space, because I feared in this stage and kind of with the success that I had found, some might judge me. They might judge the girl that was 15 and moved out and was couch serving. They might judge the girl that, it wasn't that great when it came to attending classes. But it took a while to find that confidence and to find that knowing of that is your story. That is part of your story. And it is meant to be shared because there might be a young woman or man out there who might resonate with them. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's definitely been one of those years where I'm starting to really stand in my truth and stand in who I am and not be apologetic about it.
Yeah. Bravo. I wondered too, we've talked a bit about Kamala Harris, but the overall Biden win, Van Jones on CNN broke down and this clip was shared virally. I happened to have been watching live when it happened and it certainly moved me. We have about 1 or 2 minutes, but what's your take on both that race was and the ultimate outcome?
I had no idea how relieved I would be. And I went for a hike with my son and I felt the sun for a long time. I actually felt the sun. And the last 4 years felt like I haven't been able to feel the sun because I was living in just this angst and this fear, frankly, because it seemed as though with Donald Trump, he symbolized something that helped to rally a certain kind of people who would just spit vile hate. And so for 4 years, I never realized that I was sitting with that. My friends were sitting with that. And it finally felt like we could exhale. And so I think that that's kind of what it was. But, wherever you sit on the spectrum, I mean, for me, this came down to human rights. And even watching Joe Biden take the stage Saturday night and watching him really smile at the fireworks, like shocked. The one thing that stood out to me was this is a man that can feel joy. Like this is someone that can feel joy. So it also means he must know what pain feels like. And when I know when you kind of have that spectrum, you sort of make decisions a little bit different, you know? And so I think I'm hopeful. And while some might say that's not our business, we're in Canada, we are so closely tied, and we would be foolish to think that, you know, racism does not exist up here. And so I think, you know, from this weekend, we are all hopeful, but we all know also that there's still so much work that we need to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I wish we could bottle up your optimism and positivity and just drink it.
Thank you all for listening to my big mouth. Appreciate you.
There may be a few comments in the chat for you to give a quick read to while you're talking. I can't get through them all. I do want to end on time for those who want to get going. And so thank you so much for everybody being here tonight, especially to Junia, Roksana, and Kayla, who volunteered their time to make this possible. We're so grateful to all of you. Tomorrow we'll send you a short survey by email so you can share your thoughts about this new format and about the event in general. Broadview's Reading Club is a free event and the costs to produce it are minimal. However, if you'd like to help Broadview with a small donation to help us continue to feature wonderful people like those we heard from tonight, we would appreciate it. And Sharon will post a link to make donation to Broadview in the chat. Broadview Reading Clubs exist across Canada. So if you're interested in joining a local club or starting one of your own, you can check out our information pages at broadview.org/reading-clubs, and we'll also post that into the chat. If you have a club that's not listed on those pages, please let us know so we can spread the word on your behalf. So that's about it. And if you would like to stick around for a bit of casual chatting, I won't be leading or managing the flow of the conversation, but I'll be here for a little while. Please join us afterwards for our Zoom coffee time after the event. And if you'd like to be on your way, then again, thank you so much for being here tonight, and good night. And I will be here. And I'm just catching up on all these chat. I apologize. I can't always keep up with all the chat comments. I try to just skim for the questions, but there's lots of interesting things there for me to catch up on. And I'm so excited that we had 100 people here tonight, which is the maximum. So that's great. There was actually probably a few more that couldn't get in.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it speaks directly to our speakers tonight and how excited everybody was to hear from them.
Jocelyn, I'm Walter, and actually, I'm not a United Church member.
That's okay.
I'm a what they call a marginal Mennonite.
Okay.
You might want to look at on the web what marginal Mennonite is, but the reason I'm on here is because of the wonderful people that you chose to speak to us, because the right wing has co-opted all of our Protestant churches, I believe, to a great extent, and made it really hard for people that find it hard to be part of the church to do that. And so this is, I think, why we have extremists in the United States, but I think also here in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And if we can speak against the extremes of church people and not be so sure about our positions, but leave questions and respect other opinions, then I think we could address some of the, for example, the Roma people, that we could support them if we're unified in a more central message of following Jesus. So thank you very much for your wonderful work.
Well, I'm really glad you found a home with us, Walter, with Broadview. And I feel like what you said is, very close to what I would consider our mission to be as a magazine. So Yeah, I just appreciate your articulation of that.
Jocelyn, it's Mary Leslie, and this is, I think, my 4th book club, and oh my God, this was over the top.
Yeah,
And I'm so glad you got 100 people. I know that about 10 of them were people I told to get on.
Oh, good. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I really just think this is the work of our church right now, and this is the way it needs to happen. And this is so powerful. So if you want to up with a bit more money to 500 or 5,000, I would be delighted. Anyway, I just thank you for each and every one of these people.
Mary, as a return visitor, did you like this format better with the subjects of stories than the writers, or do you think we would do a mix? I'm just curious to know what how it went for you.
Well, I don't think it's a question of one format or the other. These were the right people to profile, and so were the people you profiled before. You know, some writers and some focus of the stories people. So I just think it depends on your magazine and what's up each month. It doesn't need to be one or the other. This was truly amazing, and these people came to life even more in this format than they did in the articles.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? It's Kathy Palmer. I had typed it in, but it didn't get asked. I wondered if Roksana could tell us if she had been in touch with Amnesty Canada.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you for your question. Yes, I absolutely reached out to Amnesty Canada. They have written to my mother a expert report, and then I've also connected Amnesty UK and Amnesty. Yeah, I've also been connected to Amnesty UK with Amnesty Canada, and they have written an amazing report about my mother. So yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me know. I'm an Amnesty member as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Best of luck.
Thank you so much. I actually, I want to get in touch with Amnesty Canada. I know that on December 10th, it's International Human Rights Day, and I was trying to find someone from Amnesty, if maybe they could possibly do like a profile about me, maybe possibly write it on the Amnesty official website about my advocacy work and, you know, just my message to the world about people living with no legal status here in Canada.
Roxanne, I want to say it's Mary Leslie, and I'm also an Amnesty supporter, and they have supported Roma people before in their campaigns, and I'm going to be leading a campaign this Christmas or December. I will make sure you're on our list. And so I'll find a way to be in touch with you and let you know, get more information. But yeah, for sure, Amnesty would welcome you. I know these lists are made up a long time ahead, and they've already been distributed, but we can certainly add you to our list.
Roksana?
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Oh my God, I'm super excited right now. I can't even talk. I'll give you my contact information, and also to Kathy if she would like it as well.
I have a question for Roksana. I would like to make a donation, but I've gone on the sites and it's not clear where I make the donations. So could you?
You want to post your site again, Roksana?
There's a blog there, but
I've also, so a friend of mine, Matthew Behrens, is also in this chat. This is his website. So Matthew, if you can hear us, is there a way folks could donate on that website? Matthew, if you can hear me?
I'm just skimming through. Oh, there's Matthew. Yeah.
Roksana, we did post the link to it. I think the question is when you get on there, it's not clear exactly where you make the donation. I think there's a photo of your mom. I don't know. It's not clear. And I checked that with Matthew as well, where you actually go to make the donation. Can you maybe clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's not possible, I could possibly give my email. And if, I don't know if it's easy for you folks to do an e-transfer, like I don't know any other way besides the website that I'm going to try to connect with Matthew right now because he's also in this chat. I'm so sorry, everyone.
That's okay. Were there other stories in the magazine that caught people's attention this month while we wait for Roksana to sort that out? Any other favorite?
I have a question.
Yeah. Is somebody answering? Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay. Can I ask my question?
Of course, go ahead.
Okay. I've heard Roksana, like she said, when the brother died, they cremated and they kept the ashes for some time. Now, what I've seen is like where I am in Newfoundland, most of the cemeteries belong to the churches. How well did the church help them to try burying the ashes? If she can give a comment on that one.
Sorry, could you repeat your question? I'm so sorry.
Okay, I heard like you talked something like you lost a brother, and then he was cremated, and then you kept the ashes for some time. And then my question is, did you approach the church to help burying the ashes? Because I am in Newfoundland. What I've seen here is that most of the cemeteries belong to the churches. How did the church help you? Did you approach the church, or what does the state and the church say in terms of if the church wants to help burying the ashes?
Thank you for your question. At this point in time, my family and I have not approached anyone in regards to giving my brother a proper burial, only because, as I've mentioned before, my mother is still very scared. I know that she's in the second stages, and in God's hands, she'll be soon a permanent resident, but my mother is still waiting when she finally gets that permanent resident in her in her hand. That's when she'll feel 100% secure. Then we will take that next step forward to giving my brother that proper burial that we've been always wanting and hoping for.
Okay, thank you.
I jump in, Jocelyn?
Yeah, jump on in.
Ray, I'm with the not Fraser Road, but St. Andrew's United Church in Rockland, Ontario. I really enjoyed this session, and I want to congratulate Junia, Roksana, and Kayla, three very brave, courageous women who all taught us something this evening. And I'm certainly going to be a subscriber to this. Is this a monthly event, Jocelyn, or?
Yep, there's a couple issues a year where we combine them, but it's almost monthly.
When the next one is scheduled, you will send out an email letting people know when and how to hook up.
We could sign you up right now if you'd like. Yeah, we can put a link up. Maybe Sharon can help me put a link up to subscriptions, and you can just follow the link and subscribe, and you'll be on time to get I hope I'm not lying. You'll be on time to get our Jan-Feb issue, which will be out in early December.
Oh,
Sign up right now.
I subscribe to Broadview, and I.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what you meant.
Oh no, I'm talking about this session. This
The
session.
next.
Okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Yeah, we send out, if you're on our e-newsletter list, if we have your email address, then we send it out to everybody on our e-newsletter list. So you'll receive an email. We usually give about 2 weeks beforehand. And yeah, I should mention, when is the next one? It is December 7th at 7 p.m. December 7th, 7 p.m. Yeah, we don't have a membership or pre-registration. We just promote it.
Called out. If you want to be involved, get there early.
Yeah. Yeah, don't be late.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks to everyone who spoke this evening. Very, very powerful presentations. Thank you.
It is Carol Payne. Hi, I'm really, I'm pretty tongue-tied and dumbfounded with Roxanne's story because she's made something that's so personal, even more personal to us. And it's moved me really, really deeply that there are, when you know in your head that there are people who are undocumented, I think that maybe we should be starting a movement to talk about undocumented citizens in this country, undocumented people in this country. I don't think we want a country where people have to go 23 years and worry that they're going to be deported. That just doesn't seem very Canadian. And I know there'd be pushback, but I think it's one of those powerful things that belongs to a people of faith who say that it's only just to make these things possible for all people. I can't believe that Roxanne wouldn't make such a fine citizen of this country, and I'm sure her family too. And why should we be putting people in such pressure and such difficulty for such a long time? I think we need to do something about that. That's it.
Well, and one thing that struck me about you, Roxanne, is so often people who don't have status, live below the radar on purpose. They stay hidden because they don't want to be, they don't want immigration to catch up with them, I guess. But you've, out of necessity, made a very, public statement of your story. You shared it widely with media, and like you said, you camped out in front of the Prime Minister's office. Do you think that's helping your family, hindering your family? Makes no difference at all?
I think, I've done some research before I've even started my advocacy work. I Googled people facing deportation globally, in Canada, in United States, in Europe, all across the globe. And one thing that kept repeating itself was that folks kept saying that if you speak out, there's consequences. And I think that people who experience deportation, they have a fear of saying something and then facing the consequences for it.
Roxanne, I think you're on mute. Somehow you're on mute. It wasn't me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So sorry. So before I started my advocacy work, I checked online. And I saw several stories here in Canada, in the United States, all across the globe. And one thing that struck me, something that every person that was facing deportation, one thing they kept saying is that we're afraid to speak out. If we speak out, there's going to be consequences. For me, I didn't care if I faced any consequence. For me, it was more life and death situation, having my family being separated in 3 different countries. So then the first problem is family separation, right? And then having that strong family connection. The second thing for me was that the dangers my family would face. And so people say, you know, people often tell me, hey, Roksana, you're so brave and courageous. I think that wasn't the factor in this. I think for me, it was more of a life and death situation. And so it's something that I had to do. I had no other choice of doing that. So, yeah, I mean, there's consequences, absolutely 100%. When you say something against someone else, it's always the government versus me, for example. Like I'm a little person. I don't exist, right? You can see me, but my voice won't be heard to anybody, right? Because I don't have rights, as they say, you know. I don't exist in this world. And so, you saying that a lot of people, hide from immigration, or they hide from society because they don't want to be flagged. I think a big thanks to all of this is to my parents. My parents for several years have kept this away from my siblings and I, because they wanted to let us grow up normally as possible. But I think as I started to get older, there was no hiding this anymore. And so my family and I personally, we've never hid from immigration. We've tried to live as normal as possible, right? When you walk in public, you would never in a million years think that I'm undocumented, right? I speak well, I present myself well, I believe that I'm a good person. So you would never in a million years think, hey, that's an undocumented person. But we are amongst you. We are in your churches, we are in your grocery stores, we are everywhere, and we are human beings. And so, yes, if you speak out, there's consequences, but sometimes people are left no choice, having family separation, fleeing from persecution, coming to a country that is safe, that gives you peace and security, and then having, being threatened of being deported back to that country where you were fleeing from, puts you up against the wall, and you can't move, right? You can't move anywhere. You're up against the wall and you have no choice. So that's something that I've done. And in all honesty, I don't know if it helped me, but I know that, I had support globally. Finland, United Kingdom, Malaysia, Syria, United States, Canada, everywhere. It's absolutely amazing. And it was the people that have won, so it's unity, it's understanding, it's compassion, it's human beings helping other human beings. I think that's the real winner here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. June, do you see parallels in your story? I mean, obviously very different situations, but do you see like that feeling of you don't have a choice but to speak out at a certain point? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, I was muted. When Roksana was talking about being able to walk down the street and folks not being able to notice that you're undocumented, because it's not, it's not like you wear a t-shirt that says undocumented on it. It's often the case that trans people, as much as they can, want to pass the same way, just to kind of look like cisgender people, like to just blend in. Not everybody, but there's that. There is a similar, I guess, dynamic between sometimes just wanting to be invisible, but then recognizing that visibility is perhaps the most powerful tool you have in the struggle for equality. And I certainly have been inspired by, trans people have chosen to be visible. One of my dear friends transitioned on her first day of seminary. And when she was ordained, the question was, do we need to tell this story as Erica is being ordained as a trans woman, or is just Erica is being ordained as a woman? You don't have to tell people you're trans if you don't want to. You have that option. And she wouldn't have had to ever. And she said, no, the story needs to be that like a trans woman is being ordained, because I want, and it worked because I saw the story and I was just inspired and moved, and we've become friends now. And so, yeah, that visibility is frightening sometimes. I can certainly understand why it can create safety and security, but sometimes there are more important things than safety and security.
A higher value at stake sometimes.
Tom Stobie from Peterborough. I'm a member of Keene United Church. I have a friend who is trans who doesn't know that I know. And I have promised myself that it will always be that way unless this person indicates that information, that I am entitled to that information that I have. It's a bit of a burden, but I think it's a small one to adopt to enable someone who is living very courageously within their own hide. But it's a conundrum. Not everybody wants to be a poster boy, poster girl, spokesperson. You know, some people just want to live.
That is certainly true.
It ain't my call.
There was a time not so long ago when the generally accepted standards of care for trans people, it involved what I sort of informally call like the witness protection program. And I mean, and I say standards of care, meaning like if you went to see somebody to work with you around like mental health or actual like, you know, like physical transition related care, they would say like, okay, we will treat you, but you have got to disappear. Like the only way that you're going to get cleared for treatment is if you know, live in stealth mode. And I've read, there's a really interesting memoir called God Doesn't Make Mistakes, and it's it's self-published, I think, but it's written by a transgender woman in Texas who is a conservative evangelical Christian. So it's a strange intersection of identities. And there are times I just think, oh gosh, how can you have that conviction as a transgender woman? But she transitioned probably 25 or 30 years before I did. And there's so much of her story that is that. It's saying, well, I have a job in California. If I'm going to transition, I'm going to have to get into another line of work. I'm going to have to move to Texas. And knowing that for so long was such a big part of the trans experience, going away, disappearing and reappearing, so tempting, you know. I would love to have just like, I still would love to just go get like just a mindless office job somewhere as just the new woman on staff and not be, you know, the pastor that got fired or the person that everybody knows is trans. But
my skepticism, I don't think it would ever meant to sit in the background.
And I realized like, yeah, there's more. I couldn't do that in good conscience because
good on you.
Visibility matters. Visibility is a powerful tool for liberation, especially among those populations who have been made to be invisible, not by their own choice.
Mm. Yeah, but it's your choice.
Yeah.
It's the same as with my written comment. The rest of us who occupy this cisgendered position of privilege, we have a responsibility to speak out on the issue without necessarily outing anybody. It's the same thing in dealing with a highly dysfunctional public agency like Canada Immigration. Roksana's position would be vastly improved by a whole bunch of letters coming in from United Church people to their MPs saying, get on to this, have the prevail upon the Minister of Immigration to exercise her prerogative, I forget, I think.
Is Marco Mendocino.
Yeah, right, yeah, Mendocino. To exercise a ministerial prerogative to grant status to this family, because that's one of the basic principles on which the Immigration Act was written, was uniting families, was a legitimate cause for granting status in our country. And it appalls me that Roksana's father would be sent to Kosovo and her mother to Poland. And I mean, just because these are allegedly countries where it's safe, well, Eastern Europe is not a good place to be if you're Roma. And that this has been the case for hundreds of years. And there's no point in our pretending that it were otherwise. Just the same as for a long time, it's been a dangerous place for trans people to be.
Junia, I'm gonna just mute that for Alan. Junia, you're an American. I could have asked you about the election as well. So what was that like to hear that result for you?
Okay, so the first transgender memoir I ever read, back when I was a confused, newly self-accepting, still kind of wondering what was going to happen next, was Tomorrow Will Be Different by Sarah McBride. I highly recommend it. Sarah is a newly elected state senator for Delaware, and the new president is from Delaware.
Yeah.
And the foreword of Sarah's book was written by Joe Biden. And so, like, the guy who wrote the foreword to the first ever trans memoir I read is the president-elect of the United States. And Sarah posted a photo on her Facebook page of like she and Joe Biden like sharing this really almost an embrace, like this tender moment. And Sarah was pretty close to Beau when he was alive and has become close to Joe. And Sarah said, when I came out, well, she said something like, Joe always said to me, when you came out, Beau was so proud of you. And so like, I came out about 4 months ago, and I made the Facebook post and I shared that and said, when I came out, there are two categories of people in my life. People who saw the goodness when I came out and people who did not. And there's really not anything in between. There were people who said, yes, this makes her, she's a better person than she's ever been because of this. There's goodness, there's grace here. And yeah, there were two kinds of people and just hardly any in between. And to know that the president-elect of the United States is one of the folks that sees the goodness. I know that he and Vice President Harris have received some criticism from the trans community. I think probably, one of the number one like human rights issues facing the trans community in the States would be like Medicare for all, because I know access to medical care is a huge issue for the trans community. I'm so grateful to be transitioning here in Canada, where, well, at least in Ontario, where OHIP is one of my best friends. But I think well, it's good news. I'll just put it at that. Yeah, I voted as a Virginian, so that I didn't get to vote for any trans candidates, but I did get to vote as if I still lived in Richmond, Virginia.
Good.
And it went Democrat, right?
It did. Virginia is one of those states that the suburbs of Washington, D.C. are always the last to be counted. And they always go like 8 to 2 Democrat. So yeah, it's one of those states that tips, but it tipped a lot sooner than some of the other states.
Marilyn, were you putting your hand up to say something? You look like you waved earlier. No, you're good. Okay. I thought maybe you were waving at us earlier. I need to put an 8-year-old boy to bed, so I am going to say goodnight and thank you for everyone who stayed. And Roksana and Junia, thank you so much for sticking around for the added conversation and more questions. This has been a great night. I feel very inspired and onward to making some more great Broadview issues. So thanks again for everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.